This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim. And how does one develop skills tasting whiskey? What are the steps on the road to becoming a whiskey nerd? We're talking oily whiskeys. We're talking briny whiskeys. I'm answering your questions to celebrate 3,000 subscribers to the channel. Let's get into it. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here with you on Whiskey Whereabouts. Got a nice pour in front of me, and my challenge to you is to guess what's in this glass. For each question I answer and respond to, I will give you a clue, and you can see if you can deduce what's in this glass. You've got limited information, but you do have the color to go on to start with, and I'm going to tell you before I check out the first question that it is Highland whiskey. More to come. So let's get into the first question we have here, which asks, when in your journey did you realize you were becoming a, quote, whiskey nerd? What steps were most important when it comes to developing your senses in such a way that allows you to identify different notes when nosing and tasting whiskey? So these are sort of two questions, and this one, I'm going to save the second part for a minute, just address the sort of first part. And I like the idea of this happening in a gradual sort of fashion where you don't realize what's happening to you until it has happened. But my personal experience really getting invested as a Scotch whiskey enthusiast is a little unusual because it's really tied to the time that I've spent in Scotland and visiting the place. And I would say the way I sort of think about this is once you start looking for whiskeys to try for the purposes of comparison, for the purposes of seeing what's out there, what is new, rather than just finding some faves to have on your bar along with whatever else you have in mixers or for cocktails, that's the first step down the journey. You're not there yet, but you're on the road to whatever we want to call it. Whiskey nerd, whiskey enthusiast. By the time I took my first trip to the UK, first time I went to Scotland, obviously so much new, so much is available. By the time I got back, I had sort of really caught that sort of enthusiasm because you really were able to get your head around how much is out there and what you're missing. And so by the time I got back from my first trip to Scotland, now I was out taking those steps, trying to just, never the same whiskey twice, always trying to reach out, always trying to find something new. And that's how it starts. By the time I went back and spent an extended period of time in Scotland, that's where most of those pictures at the beginning, in that sort of montage at the beginning of the video, show me at all the distilleries. I had really come to appreciate and really be charmed by the place. The magic of Scotland and the beauty and the nature and the history and all that, and really feeling like a part of that is part of the whiskey. And I did a video, I talked about this experience with one specific whiskey, and it was Ardbeg Corey Vrecken. I actually did it when Daniel over the Whiskey Vault invited a lot of us to do sort of guest videos. I'll put a link up here if you haven't seen that video. We'll throw Daniel some views. I'm sure he can use those. But basically talking about how I had first had that whiskey. I'd had Ardbeg before. I'd had some big whiskeys, but I'd never actually had the Corey Vrecken. It's a little more expensive than Ugadal and all that. Until I was there, I was actually at a hotel bar on Islay in Port Ellen and had that whiskey, and that was like the sort of moment of no return, really opening up the horizons for what was out there. Now you've got the passion. You're not just fact-finding. You're not just out there to sample or see what's out there. You have had an experience that was just swept you off your feet, and you get passionate about how special the spirit is. And that's how we end up here on YouTube, having this conversation, talking to you, just to share it, just to talk about it, you know, and share that passion with people who get it, who understand. And so when you ask, how do you know? And I think it's when you feel like you got, you know, head over heels, fell for, you know, it may not be one specific pour or one bottle, but when you've got to that place with the Scotch whiskey where it's really something that you have that almost sort of emotional connection, the passion about it, that's when you've achieved that next level. This whiskey can be bought here in the US for several dollars less than $80. Next question piggybacks in the comments from last week's video on that last question I read. This one says, I too am interested in what steps to take when trying to develop one's senses to pick out as many notes as possible. Another question I have is, what is the best technique to get the most notes on the palate? I always feel like the finish comes too fast, and I'm not entirely sure how to separate palate notes from finish notes. So we got kind of two questions here. It's a good question, and it kind of picks up before about developing senses. And there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is the boring answer, and to quote Allen Iverson, we're talking about practice. You just need a lot of reps. I can tell you some tricks or some strategies that might help. So we're talking about get a fresh pour, and we're going to try to taste and note this whiskey. The first thing that sort of combines what I was talking about reps is I always, if I have any whiskey that I haven't had more than a couple of times, I am always going to go through all 3 stages and note that whiskey. Not everybody needs to do this, but it's really good practice. This was my notebook in all my time in Scotland. I took this everywhere, and I noted every single whiskey that I had. This is the notebook that I've kept since I started the channel, and oftentimes I will find that I'm out and I will not have my notebook with me, but I do have my phone, and I just go on a notes app, and I'll just do that, and I can still go through the steps, right? What are the steps? You may be asking these 2 questions. And what can we do to pick apart? It can get overwhelming, especially if the conditions are not perfect. If you're trying to go too fast, if you're going from whiskey to whiskey. But let's talk about just having some time. You had a pour at home, conditions are optimal, you have plenty of time, and you're unpacking this whiskey, and you're still having some trouble finding some different notes. I had a video a while back on the channel talking about tasting whiskey for beginners and using the tasting sort of wheel, the flavor wheel. You go through the different phases, and it makes you go and check different styles of flavor. And obviously, you don't need the wheel to check and say, is this peated whiskey? You know, is this, you know, at one of the sort of extreme ends. But when you're trying to pick apart a whiskey and trying to find bourbon cask notes, you know, or you know, barley notes or fruit notes and, you know, estery notes, whatever, you don't need to know where they came from, what category. You just need to look at a list and then check and see what types of sections on the wheel that you're at. This is a really helpful way to come back, especially if you've been having a lot of the same whiskeys. I'm just in love with just smoky Isla whiskey, and suddenly you're branching out and you're trying lowland whiskeys or whatever. It's totally different what the dominant notes are going to be, and it's helpful to have sort of a list like that. Here's another trick. There's a lot of common notes that show up, and we know this, like obvious cask notes and vanilla is a very common note, and honey and sort of stuff like that. But you hear me do these reviews enough, in your own experience noting whiskeys, you'll see a lot of, not necessarily really exotic, but maybe notes that you don't come across all the time, right? Apricot, maybe peach, big, spices, nutmeg, ginger, you know, something, you know, even cinnamon. Ask yourself, these and other fruit and other notes that we see coming up again and again, when's the last time that you had one of those fruit? When's the last time you had the actual thing, not a peach flavored tea or something? Like, you actually had bit into a peach. I find, especially if you're going about your day and you're in that spice cabinet, you can just try a little bit of nutmeg or ginger just to remind yourself what that in isolation is like, rather than kind of just like, yeah, my brain is saying sherry cask notes, baking spice, baking rack, different fruit and things like that. If you're finding that you're reading reviews, you're watching videos, and people are bringing up notes again and again that you're not ever finding. You may be having totally different whiskeys, but assuming you're like, I'm really frustrated, I'm not getting that. It sometimes is helpful to seek out that flavor and expose yourself to it. Now, you don't want to get like where you're looking for it in every sort of and projecting it onto the whiskey. So when we're trying to note the palate, this question points out, it goes by fast, right? I can sit here, I can nose this whiskey all day, right? I take a sip, and I sit with the finish for a while. The palate can be fleeting. So what we do is a lot of times holding it. If you hold it too long, you're not really going to continue to get the notes in a representative way. It's interacting with the moisture in your mouth, and you're going through a sort of cycle, and depending on the ABV, you are going to have a response. You're going to get that sort of black pepper, or if it's higher ABV, you're going to get that kind of almost tingly, like needle sensation, or a numbing sensation. If you're trying to hold Octomore, there's only so much you're going to be able to hold it. But no one ever said you had to do it in the first pass, right? You've got a whole pour here. Save some for the finish, but you can always go back. If you're trying to note the whole whiskey, especially if you only ordered a pour out or something, make sure you keep some in reserve so you can do the finish. But what you want to kind of inventory is what are you experiencing while the whiskey is on your tongue, in your mouth, physically. You are tasting and experiencing whiskey. So it's more than just the taste. It's that the presence it has, it's that feel. Once you have swallowed it, you are sort of subject to the finish, right? You're not actively holding the whiskey. You're not actively nosing it. You have experienced the whiskey, and now the finish is just going to play out. So you've got that time that takes to inventory the finish aspect of it, right? You may need a second shot at that as well, but I would definitely try with a whiskey that is not too big ABV, say, 46% whiskey, and really force yourself to try to complete your sort of inventory of all the notes and impressions you have of each of the three stages before you move on to the next, until you can start getting an easier feel for it. So hope that is helpful. Gonna go and give I owe a clue here on the whiskey. And my whiskey, this is a good clue, okay? So the first two were pretty general. This whiskey that I have poured, the bottle that I had in the vatting that led to my bottle, it included whiskey distilled in the first year of distillation of this distillery. So that's your next clue. Think about that while I read the next question, which comes from my friend Sartug, the whiskey enthusiast. If you're not subscribed to his channel, you were doing it all wrong. I'll put a link to his channel below. You should definitely be checking his videos out. And he says, I want to know how many distilleries did you visit, not just in Scotland, and which ones really did stick out for you, and why? Great question from Sartug, who was recently in Scotland, has some great videos talking about that recently on his channel. And I had to go through some notes and do a count here, but I believe I have visited 19 Scotch whiskey distilleries. And then I'm not counting any of the sort of small local distilleries here in the US, but sort of larger, sort of known distilleries. In addition to those 19, I have visited 2 more in Dublin, if you count the Jameson, whatever they call it, the warehouse or whatever that is in Dublin. They don't distill there anymore, so it's a lot like that Johnny Walker experience in Edinburgh. So you get everything but the tour of production, you get a tasting, and you get some exhibits about the history and whatnot, and of course, a shop. In terms of the most beautiful location, subjective and may not replicate the same experience again, but the day I was there, Boonhaven is in this really sort of remote part of Isla, which is already such a small place, famously not accessible by road for a long time. During the distillery's operation, everything came in and out by the sea. You can see Jura, and the day I was there was a light rain, gave way, there were rainbows over the water. I mean, it was incredible, a really beautiful environment that really makes that place where they make the whiskey really feel special. In terms of the visitor center, I was really surprised to find that one of the best in terms of, one that is really sort of built up for visitors was Glenlivet. And you don't expect that. You expect Glenlivet is kind of old, sort of guard, right? It's a whiskey that's really common. It's been around for a long time in that form. And it's a whiskey a lot of us graduate out of because the presentation is weak. But the spirit isn't. And the distillery is a really welcoming place. They did a big overhaul of it, now several years ago. You think maybe you're going to go to Glenlivet, it's going to be some old stuffy kind of Scotch whiskey, hunting lodge estate decor. That's Glenfiddich. Glenlivet was light, bright color, sort of use of sort of natural sort of elements, heather to decor. I was there on the absolute coldest day I think I spent in all my time in Scotland. And they had the fire going, very welcoming. They have not just a bar, but a lounge, sofas. They've got cocktails to be made. The grounds, you can walk from the distillery. A little marked trail will take you to this sort of ruined castle on the way. The Highland cows are there. I mean, it's everything that you want it to be. Everybody's super hospitable, and there is a discovery awaiting you there. If you haven't had anything but the sort of core range Glenlivets, they have a very impressive selection of single cask, properly presented cask strength Glenlivet that will really change your perception of what that spirit is capable of, because you're used to having that 40% chill filtered, color added, core range stuff that sells so well they have no reason to change it. But you can really get that experience and just a really charming kind of environment that really still felt kind of like an event to go there. It's sort of contrast with when I was at Glenallachie, also in Speyside. It was before they overhauled the visitor center, and it felt like mom and pop sort of family business. You went in, everybody knew everybody, and the tour and tasting host had baked a Scottish tablet, had brought it in to share with everybody who worked there, gave us on the tour and there for the tasting, some of that to go with our little whiskey flights. So charming. So those are sort of two polar extremes. So I started really targeting the kind of more premier, higher value ticket. Usually they're billed as warehouse tastings, and honestly, the best one I had was at Ardbeg. And this is what I have my notes from that visit, so I know exactly what I had. And at Ardbeg, I had Dark Cove, Supernova, Kelpie, 2 different batches of the 19-year Trevon to compare, and a 22-year, along with, there was other whiskey available. Those are the highlights. A really impressive return on your ticket to sit in that Dunnage warehouse tasting these whiskeys that are, if you didn't have them from before, they're almost impossible sort of to get. I don't know what they're pouring now. This was several years ago, before the channel, so I can't say that you would get that again, but in terms of when I went, so those are kind of the 3 things: the location, the vibe and the presentation, and where you're gonna kind of be based in the visitor center, and then the tasting. And those were the sort of ones that pop out to me. A great question. Next clue: this whiskey is 46.8% non-age statement whiskey. Any suggestions for a great budget pick that highlights more salty, briny notes, or more funky industrial motor oil notes? I'm trying to find some budget bangers that have some or both of these notes. let us know when you find them. This is a great question because these are some really great, very Scotch whiskey notes that can be pretty rewarding in balance. And when I think of these whiskeys with these notes, I don't think of budget whiskeys. Okay, so we're talking about industrial. Is that how we described it? Motor oil, funky. The first whiskey that comes to mind is Glen-Scotia 15-year, a whiskey that did very, very well in the Malmanis competition this year. A fantastic whiskey. That description kind of goes right to Campbelltown, right? And good luck finding, Campbelltown whiskey at a reasonable price these days. But the good people who own and operate the Springbank and its sister distillery did a solid and got all of the Campbelltown distilleries together to contribute some whiskey to a blended malt called the Campbelltown Lock. And so if you have access to this whiskey, it's a very, very good value. I'll put my review up here. If you haven't seen that, it is going to bring in some of these notes. It's not going to be as intense as, say, a Glen-Scotia 15-year. There are Islay whiskeys that have that more industrial, Lagavulin is often described as having that sort of oil kind of quality, but I don't really associate it with the 8-year. You're asking about salt brine rather than the sort of iodine medicinal. So Lafroy 10 is not what we're talking about here. I'd say that when I think of briny, outside of that sort of obvious association with the peat, for inexpensive, I'm thinking about Old Pulteney 12-year. The maritime malt. It has a sea salt sort of element to it. It's not a very well presented whiskey, but it's also a very inexpensive whiskey. So depending on what you meant by budget, that's a real entry point. I think of sea salt with Bunnahabhain 12, but not sea brine. That's a great value whiskey, but that's more salty air than salty brine to me. So I hope that those weren't incredibly obvious, but let us know, everybody else. Wisdom of crowds. Let us come up with a better choices. This is going to be 50% peated and 50% unpeated whiskey. So we've got a vatting. Half the casks had peated whiskey, and half of them had unpeated whiskey that went into the vatting that resulted in my bottle. Next question. How can a 10-year Scotch be so flavorful when many other 10-year, 12-year Scotches are not? It couldn't be the barrels. Many other Scotches use the same combination. Is it the stills? This is a wonderful question because it gives me an excuse to talk about what might be my favorite thing about Scotch whiskey and why I believe it to be the best spirit in the world, and it is that Scotch whiskey is a symphony, and there are so many different aspects in this orchestra that are contributing to the overall experience. And what do I mean by all that? First thing we're saying is flavorful, more flavorful. So that can mean two things. If we're talking about quantity, then we're talking about how is Springbank 10 so complex when so many 10 and 12 years whiskeys, even good ones, are simple. And Springbank is a wonderful example of what we're talking about because so many decisions are made from and let's not wade into terroir and whiskey and all of the sort of let's just assume that we've just sourced some malt and we started from there, and even starting from there, the length of the fermentation, the spirit cuts, the shape of the still, the angle of the line arm, the use of a condenser versus a warm tub. So many of these things have huge sort of implications into the nature. And when the distiller knows how to play all of these instruments in concert with each other, that's when you can use all of this chemistry-based craft with this knowledge experience and make art. Make a spirit that sort of transcends its utilitarian purpose. That's the way that I think about. That's why I like this question. What if it's just a bigger flavor? You get a 10-year whiskey that just knocks you back. Say something really basic, something like an Ardbeg 10-year or something, Leche 10-year, Port Charlotte 10-year, right? So let's assume that this question is assuming a baseline 46% ABV, okay? So it's not that. It hasn't been chill filtered. Let's assume it hasn't been. There's still so many of these choices, and I'm afraid that I have to push back on one aspect of the question, saying it couldn't be the barrels. The maturation could also have a huge part of this, because not every cask is created equal. Not every bourbon cask is created equal. We have first fill casks, we have second fill casks, right? So we have that aspect. We have where it was matured. Was it matured at the distillery in the tonnage warehouse? Or was it matured on the mainland in an industrial sort of warehouse, upright, in pallets? That's going to affect it. That variety, even among quality whiskeys. I'm not even talking about watered down 40% chill filtered whiskey. I'm talking about properly presented whiskeys offering totally different experiences. It is the product of all of these decisions and a balancing. How are we going to balance all of these qualities? What are we going to emphasize? What are we going to round off? What are we going to de-emphasize? And the amount of variety available is what makes this journey so rewarding. So to come back to the beginning, as you've taken those steps on the path, you've really got just a first glimpse of how much is out there. You've fallen head over heels for a specific whiskey or a specific distillery or whatever it is, and you're in. You've got the passion. It continues to reward as you continue on the journey, as you encounter new whiskeys that are new to you, and as we keep seeing new distilleries, new casks being used. There's always something to compare and incorporate, because there's just so many possible expressions, and that's sort of what we're here for. So if you are enjoying taking this journey with us here, make sure you subscribe if you haven't. Next week I will reveal what's in this glass, because next week I'm going to review this whiskey on the channel. So you have until then to go in the comments and give me your guesses on what you think this is. And until then, I will see you on the next one.